Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's project is how to do this top stitched elastic and drawstring waistband. So I'm going to take you step by step how to do this. Now you can do this on any pattern that has a wide waistband. I am using my Sky Joggers pattern today, so I'll have information below about where to get that pattern, but really you just need something that has a waistband on it to be able to do this. Okay, let's work on how to do a drawstring waistband. So here is my waistband, and the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm marking the center front of it. And then the first thing I'm going to want to do on that center front line is I'm going to need to make a buttonhole so that the drawstring has a place to go in and out. So what I like to do is fold the waistband as it's going to be once it's finished. Make sure that I'm matching up those raw edges, which is a little difficult with this fabric because it's kind of slippery. Then I'm going to get my ruler. And what I want to do with the ruler first is measure up that center front portion there. Okay, and as you can see, it's 2 3/4. There is a 1/2 inch seam allowance in this pattern, so I want to first take out that 1/2 inch that's going to be lost to the seam allowance. That would be to here, and that leaves me with 2 1/4 inches. And I want to center my buttonhole for the drawstrings in the middle of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark here at 1 1/8 that is the center. Okay, so I've got my buttonhole foot on my machine, and I'm setting this to a 1/2 inch wide buttonhole. And then on the back of my fabric, I've gone ahead and added some fusible interfacing on the back of that buttonhole area. So I'm just going to line up my mark here and stitch that buttonhole. And go ahead and fold the waistband in half, matching the short edges. And I want to stitch down that short edge to form a loop. After the waistband is sewn into a loop, this is what it's going to look like. And then we want to go ahead and take the pants, and we're going to match up. We want to make sure the buttonhole side is facing towards the top. We're going to match up the seam with the back, center back seam on the pants. And then we want to match up the buttonhole area with center front. And then pin the rest of the way around the waistband or clip. Okay, once you have that waistband all clipped or pinned on, you're going to sew once all the way around. Alright, once we've sewn the waistband on, here's what it looks like. And then what I want to do is start folding the waistband down just so that I cover that seam and pinning it to cover it. Alright, once I have that all pinned, I'm going to move over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along the bottom edge here to form the waist casing. I am going to leave a gap on one end to be able to insert the elastic for the next step. Once you have the waistband sewn on, then it's time to insert the elastic. So I've got my elastic. This tool is called a bodkin. It just clamps on and that slides to keep it pulled on, and I'm going to insert that elastic through the casing using that gap I left. Okay, once I get that elastic back all the way around, going to very slightly overlap these ends, and I will stitch across here with a zigzag stitch, and then also the opening in the casing closed. Okay, here is what the waistband looks like after I've got the elastic in and the casing sewn shut. Now let's head over to the machine and I'll show you how to sew the extra top stitching onto this casing. Okay, over at the sewing machine, I'm going to put this presser foot onto my machine. This one has a seam guide on it that's going to be really handy for sewing this type of top stitching. My machine is set for a regular straight stitch and the longest length that I can do on my machine. The reason we don't have to do a stretch stitch is because we're going to be stretching the fabric as we stitch this. Okay, I've got my pants inside out because that way I can put the presser foot on the inside and give them a good several tugs to make sure that the casing is distributed evenly around the elastic. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the first line of casing. These are 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to measure 3/8 of an inch beyond the needle. So 1, 2, 3, and that is where I want the edge of my fabric to stay lined up. I'm going to put the needle down, and then I am going to stretch as I stitch. All right, and now I am ready to move it again and do the next line of stitching. Before I do that, I want to double check where my buttonhole is to make sure that my stitching is going to be close to the buttonhole. So it looks like the buttonhole, if I line it up right on the edge of the presser foot here, I want to be stitching halfway in the middle. So I'm going to line up to this line on the presser foot. And you can start in the front if it's easier to match your buttonhole that way. And what I'm lining up to the presser foot is my previous line of stitching, not the edge of the fabric. But once I get that on the correct 1/8 inch mark, then I'm also looking at the outside edge. So I have 2 reference points to make sure I'm in the right place. Okay, once I've gotten those channels sewn, I'm going to go back to the buttonhole side to measure again. And it looks like in order to clear the buttonhole, I'm going to want to keep the previous line of stitching matched up to the last mark on my foot. All right, one last line of stitching, and I want to be halfway in between the casing stitch and this stitch. So that means this is the halfway point on my foot, and that means that's where I want that line of stitching to be lined up. Okay, once you've sewn that casing, here's what it looks like. Let me turn this right side out. And I've got my buttonhole here. So all I need to do to complete the drawstring casing is get whatever cording or ribbon that I'm going to use for the drawstring and insert it through that channel. For ribbon length, I like to take the hip measurement and add about 18 inches to it so that I'll have enough hanging out to tie. And then I like to knot the ends of my ribbon or drawstring to help prevent fraying and also to help keep the ribbon from pulling through the hole. It also helps if you're using ribbon if you cut at an angle on the ends. It helps with fraying. So there we go. There is my drawstring waistband with top stitching on the casing.